Hello, welcome to the Sutliffian Report, the place where the news is never hidden and the truth always wins. Today we have with us Gadi Adelman. Gadi Adelman's a national security expert and a former Israeli soldier. But this is a Christian news show, so let's start with a scripture. Today we're starting with Joshua 1, verses 6 to 9. Be strong and of good courage, for unto this people shall you divide for an inheritance the land which I swore unto their fathers to give them. Only be you strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law, which Moses my servant commanded you. Turn not from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper whithersoever you go. This book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth, but you shall meditate therein day and night, and that you may observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then you shall make your way prosperous, and then you shall have good success. Have not I commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Be not afraid, neither be you dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you whithersoever you go. This God of the Jews who is speaking to Joshua knows man so well. He speaks about the strength in an area men are known to be weak. Not physical strength, but spiritual strength. God doesn't talk about physical exercise to beef you up and to get you ready for war. No, this is a wonderful God who thinks of men's hearts. He is concerned for their ability to fight spiritually and win. When you consider the physical battles ahead of Joshua, the wars, the numerous battles with hand-to-hand combat and swords, you would have thought God would have been encouraging them to be ready to be battle with hand-to-hand combat. But God is with them. Why would they fear? So what does God tell Joshua they should do? Read the word. Joshua is told to read the word, to read the 5 books of Moses and meditate on it day and night. God calls the law. Be strong means to God to be in the word. Beef up the spiritual body. This is only my second entry on the book of Joshua. So dear Lord Jesus, your love and kindness to us are a marvel. We can never fully grasp how you can love us as much as you do. Lord, strengthen us. Help us to grow in your word, that we may be an example of your great love. In Jesus' name, amen. I have with me Gadi Adelman. Gadi Adelman is one of these incredible national security experts who I, by the grace of God, was lucky to have come join me. Now, I have...
Didn't even pay me.
One of the things we've actually talked about how when you tell the truth, you don't usually get paid for it, unfortunately. Gadi's here. I asked him here to talk about the horrible attacks that have been happening against Israel. It's our beloved ally, the only ally in the Middle East that is a democratic country that we should be standing behind. So, Gadi, could you please tell us what's been happening in Israel this past week?
Hey, Paul, how you doing? And it's good to be back on the show. You know, I know you're on different media outlets, but to be back on BTR, Blog Talk Radio, it's a bit unusual. It's a full circle for me, as you know. Unless someone's been living under a rock for the last week, they obviously know that Israel has been, for any other term, lack of a better term, at war with Hamas in Gaza. So this has been going on. Today is the 11th day. And right before you went on the air, you may or may not be aware, but a ceasefire agreement has been reached. I say that with quotations, because we've seen this time and time and time again. Every time the same thing occurs. Hamas will shoot rockets. They shoot off enough. Israel gets ticked. And it's a tit for tat. We fire on you. You fire on us. It goes on for a few days, a few weeks, in some cases, a few months, like back in 2014 during the last Israeli operation where they actually went in with ground forces. And then Hamas yells, "Uncle, uncle, we give," and you have a ceasefire. And this has basically happened each and every time since 2005 when Israel fully disengaged from Gaza. And I want to kind of touch on that. But the main thing is, it's not a ceasefire. It's a rearming event. All this does is it gives Hamas time to rebuild the infrastructure that Israel has destroyed, rebuild their communications, and most of all, stockpile their weapons that they've utilized in this most recent attack on Israel. And it goes on and on and on. Well, this time around, Israel said no. They didn't go in with ground forces, but what they did was Hamas actually started begging, for lack of a better term. They were begging for a ceasefire 3 days ago. And Israel said, no, we're not going to give you a ceasefire this time. We're not going to let you stipulate we start it and we're going to say when to finish it. No more. And Israel said, we will not stop until our military objectives have been completed. Unfortunately, the leader of Hamas has yet to be killed. This is like the guy that will not die. And, you know, that I'm a little apprehensive, to say the least, because like every other ceasefire, and I guarantee you, my phone, which is sitting here, it hasn't stopped. The red alerts that come in from Israel are live on my phone. And right before we went on the air, there were 6. So the ceasefire is supposed to take place in 54 minutes. At 2 o'clock Israeli time, 2 in the morning, the ceasefire will take effect. Well, what's going to happen is for the next hour, because that'll be in 1 hour, we're going to hear that phone go off because Hamas is going to take advantage of, we've got an hour left, let's do as much damage as possible. And this is what goes on every single time a ceasefire agreement is reached. And I'm a little ticked and I'm very apprehensive because we're going to find out whether or not, like before, is this ceasefire going to last a few hours, maybe a few days, if Israel's lucky, a few months. But what Americans and most of the world, unless they read the Israeli news or unless they have the Red Alert app on their phone, what most people don't know is that these rockets are a regular thing. A week does not go by where 1 or 2 rockets fly in from Gaza into Israel for no reason. And Israel, if you want to talk about restraint, they sit back and they're like, okay, it was only 2 rockets. They hit an open area. It set a field on fire. All right, nobody was hurt. Just ignore it. And they do ignore it. Now, I want to know what other country on earth, what other sovereign nation on earth would sit back and show the type of restraint that Israel has shown. And I was on a show just the other night it was supposed to be a half hour, lasted an hour, so I'm giving you warning. And I said to the guy, imagine you're sitting in Phoenix, Arizona, and 4,000 rockets rain down on the city of Phoenix from Mexico. Is America just going to sit by and let that happen? Or better yet, and a terrorist faction, some organization in Trenton, New Jersey, decides to just shoot 4,000 rockets into downtown Manhattan, New York. Is America going to sit by and let that happen? Of course not. And there isn't a country in the world that will. So this, proportional response and this show restraint, Iron Dome, the Iron Dome system, has saved more Gazan lives than it has Israeli lives. Oh. And I'm going to explain that very simply. There have been over 4,000 rockets. That's an average of 400 a day for the last 11 days fired from Gaza into Israel. The Iron Dome has been 90% effective. If the Iron Dome did not exist, we wouldn't have only 12 Israeli deaths. We might have 1,200 Israeli deaths. And Israel would have had to respond accordingly. And they would have had to go in quickly with ground forces where a lot more civilians would have been killed. So in essence, the Iron Dome is not just saving Israeli lives, it's saving Gazan civilian lives. And this is what people in the media just drive me crazy when they say Israel needs to show restraint. That was my rant. Now you can go.
Wow. I have a comment along those streams, and it's by Jonathan Gillum. He said, the idea of proportional responses in war is a ridiculous modern construct of idiotic leftist logic. When you are attacked with potential lethal force, your actions should bring to bear a response that not only stops the threat, but ensures no further actions from the attacking forces are possible. In simpler words, complete elimination of the threat is warranted. Exactly. War is just like defense of your own life, is not a game of patty cakes or a time to consider fairness. It's a time to dominate with overwhelming force.
Exactly. And you know, it's also not a body count. And what people need to realize, and Jonathan Gillum and I are friends. I've spoken with him. I've been on his show. We disagree on a lot. That I agree with 100% what he said there. And what people need to realize, and it just irks me that people don't understand the full dynamics of what's going on. You know, most people in the United States, they can't find Montana on a map of the United States unless they live in Montana. Okay. I don't expect them to understand the demographics of the Middle East, let alone Gaza versus the West Bank. Most people watching their TV, most people getting their news from the mainstream media are under the impression that Gaza and the West Bank are the same place. This is why I spent an hour on the previous show the other night with someone else, and I started back in the time of the Canaanites to explain where Gaza is, how they got the name Palestinian, which because after the Canaanites were overthrown, they were overthrown in Gaza City by the Philistines. And I'm not going to get into all that. I know you've talked about this ad nauseum on your show, and your people understand this. But most people don't even know the difference between Gaza and the West Bank. And what we're dealing with here is a situation where the media would have you believe 224 Gazans have rocket attack. That's one. Count them. What you would have, the media would have you believe is that Israel committed all of these killings. But what they don't talk about is, and I'll give you an example, in the first 1,000 rockets that Hamas fired at the beginning of this barrage that started 11 days ago, out of the first 1,000 rockets, 200 of them landed inside Gaza. Now, what Hamas will do, because they run the health ministry in Gaza, who is reporting the deaths to the international media, is they demand, and they're listened to because they're in charge, they demand that every death be counted as a death from Israel. How many of those people died because their own rockets fell within their own borders? Then on top of that, Israel has stated that they know of more than 160 terrorists have been killed by Israel. So let's take 160 from 224. We've already cut it in half. Then remove the amount that were killed by their own rockets. We don't know that number because Gaza, Hamas will never admit to it. These people are fighting a war in the media. They are the first country, or I shouldn't say country, they are the first military in history on earth utilizing their own people as human shields for the media. This is what they want. They want to fight. They know they cannot beat Israel in a military conflict. But what they can do is they can vilify Israel on the world stage, and they can make the media turn on Israel and say, look at what they're doing to these poor Palestinians in Gaza. And they're winning that war because that's how they play the game. They want Israel to go in and have civilian deaths. They don't care. And the proof that they don't care is many of the rockets that they launched into Israel hit Arab territories and they killed Arabs. They don't care. To them, it is not a game of beating Israel militarily. They know they're not going to conquer Israel with rockets. They know Israel can go in and literally level all of Gaza. but they also know that Israel won't do that. And they use the civilian casualties in the media as a weapon. And it's the first time we've seen this in military history. And they're winning because now we see anti-Semitism is on the rise. I don't know if you saw the video out of Florida last night where Jewish people dining outside in the street were attacked and beaten by a group of Palestinian supporters. This is what they wanted, and they've achieved it. And this is what happens every time. Go on. I didn't mean to.
It's exactly what I'm going to be covering when you go off. Is I actually have several accounts. There's one in Toronto, in Canada, yes, where a rebel media person was attacked. There's another. I mean, there's a whole bunch of these things happening, even in New York City, which I didn't really account, where a Jewish rabbi was attacked. Mm-hmm. This is happening all around the world, and it's the stuff I'm going to cover about Europe. It's just this is it is the Islamic PR, yes, for the hatred of Islam. That is, they use this as an attack. Now, when I was going to talk about this later, but when I was in Germany, we met with a rabbi there who was for lack of a better term, interfaith type person. Now, he sent his family home to Israel. Mm-hmm. He said it was too dangerous for them to be there. And because they were, I want you to think about that. It was safer for them in Israel than in Paris.
Than in Germany.
Districts, Germany. And they talked about, this is just crazy. When I'm thinking about this, it's just crazy. He sent them because he said, when there's a problem, that the problem is it's worse there, mm-hmm, than it is. All of a sudden things are bad there. So they use these events as press for their hatred.
Exactly. And Paul, I know you'll remember this as soon as I say it. The last big war that Israel had with Hamas was 7 years ago in 2014. And I know as soon as I say this, you're going to go, I remember that, because you're up on this stuff. Throughout Europe, religious Jews were told, don't wear your kippah, your yarmulke, outside in public, and don't let your star, your Jewish star, don't let it be seen. Make sure you tuck it in, or don't wear it at all. Why? Because they were being beaten up in the streets. Do you remember that?
It's not that long ago. It doesn't seem like that long ago. The government of
Germany told their Jews, don't wear your skull cap in public. That's like telling the Pope not to wear his. So, this is what we've come to. And I don't remember the exact statistic, but the FBI, the United States statistic on hate crime. Yes, we know anti-Semitism is on the rise. Or as Rabbi Nachman always told me, it's not on the rise, it's always there. It's just underlying. And then when things like this happen, that it comes back out again. And I think he's right, because the person that's an anti-Semite is going to be an anti-Semite regardless. But the FBI statistics say that Jews are the number one recipients in the United States of hate crimes, 5 times more, if I remember right, than the next minority. And yet Jews only make up 2% of the population in the United States. Think about that. More than Asian crimes, more than Black crimes, more than Hispanic crimes, Jews are the number one target for hate crimes in the United States. Well, that's just the US. This is going on around the world. And I do want to just get one thing very clear for all your listeners, and I want to give them some talking points, because no other country goes to the lengths that Israel goes to avoid civilian casualties. And people may have heard the term roof knocking or door knocking.
Yes.
And I want to explain what Israel does. Israel will decide that they're going to take out a building in Gaza because it houses Hamas infrastructure of some sort, whether it's communications or whether it's one of their terrorist places that leads to a tunnel, or whether it houses their weapons. They decide they're going to take out a building. They don't go and take out the building. No, they text every single cell phone in Gaza in Arabic hours beforehand, not minutes, hours. beforehand. And they say, we are going to attack at such and such a time, at such and such a location. If you are not a member of Hamas, please remove yourself from the area. But then they go a little farther. They fly over and they'll drop leaflets in Arabic because, God forbid, someone might not have a cell phone. Maybe they didn't get the text. And then they do what they call door knocking in Hebrew. I've heard it in English referred to as roof knocking. They drop dummy bombs in inert. They will not go off. They drop dummy bombs over the target before they bomb the target. Now, any other country, name one for me that has ever gone to such lengths. So this proportionality thing, and just one more thing I want you to think about, and I want everyone in the studio audience that's listening to think about this. If during World War II, America and the Allies had been told, you must fight with proper proportionality, Europe would still be under Nazi rule. Japan would have most of Asia, and I wouldn't be here.
I think the thing that needs to be understood here is that there's a huge difference between what Israel believes about the importance of life,
yes,
and what Islam teaches. Islam teaches that death is the way. While Israel teaches everyone's life is a sacred thing, even if it's a Muslim's life.
Yes.
This is a huge, huge reason for their philosophy of door knocking, which is beyond comprehension when you actually study. There's an actual video out this week where an Israeli jet pilot observes children playing in an area that they had designated for door knocking, and they canceled the attack as the pilots saw this. Now, I don't think that could have been possible back in World War II.
No, they bombed all of Berlin.
Yeah, there was just, the idea was to say, get out, we're going to beat the hell out of you.
Exactly.
It's just
overwhelming
insanity.
Force. Overwhelming force.
Yeah.
And the other thing, and you just touched on it, where you talk about how the Jews look at the sanctity and how sacred life is. And the Jews try and differentiate between civilian and terrorist. There's a very famous saying, and as you know, you and I, if you remember, I had mentioned this to you. I've talked about it on my own radio show back when I had America Akbar here on the network. I used to talk about how I was lucky enough, I was blessed to have met Golda Meir. And Golda Meir, for those that don't know, was a female prime minister of Israel. And as Menachem Begin once said when he was in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament, and she was the prime minister, he said she's the toughest guy in the government because she was such a tough lady. But Golda Meir, speaking to the Arab leaders after the 1973 Yom Kippur War, said the following, and I'll translate it to English. She said, "We can forgive you for killing our sons and daughters, but we can never forgive you for making us kill yours." That's the sanctity of life. That is how Israel thinks. We'll forgive you for killing our own, but we can't forgive you for making us kill you. That's how a Jew thinks. Tikkun olam. This is what it's all about. This is why Israel didn't send in ground forces. They don't want war. It's that old saying, Paul, that I know you know. If the Arabs were all to put down their weapons today, there would be peace. If Israel were to put down their weapons, there'd be no more Israel. It's very simple.
This is one of the things that the world needs to understand. If you have no comprehension of what's happening, the ceasefire will not last. The purpose of a ceasefire under Islam is for the purpose of rearming.
Exactly.
And they have already said they're getting their weapons from Iran. They have said that these new missiles are coming from Iran. There is several there's actually been video of somebody claiming they're using weapons from World War I, which is really impossible to believe. And if you look at what they have several videos of this stuff. Now, I recommend people go to memory.org, MEMRI.org, and see the videos. This is coming. They're saying this coming. They're admitting it comes right straight from Iran. They're taking these in, and these weapons are purposed to do nothing but to kill Jews. And I'm going to be talking about the quote peaceful, the quote moderate nations are proclaiming these acts of these missiles as glorifications of Islam, and this is scary.
The rockets that Hamas has been using this time around, and the reason they've been able to reach as far north as Tel Aviv from Gaza, and people need to look at a map to understand that, because we're not talking about missiles, we're talking about rockets, and people need to be able to differentiate. The main difference between a missile and a missile has a guidance system, and thank God they don't have missiles, because they'd be pinpoint targeting places rather than just shooting what we call spray and pray. And this is why they scream Allah Akbar every time they shoot it off, because they're praying it'll hit something. Many of them land, like I said, in Gaza. They'll land in open fields in Israel. But unfortunately, many of them land in populated centers, and that's what they're aiming for. They are aiming for Israeli civilians. They're not attacking Israeli military bases. They're aiming at Israeli population centers. But many of these rockets that they're using, and Israel knows this, and like you said, Memory and other organizations that are on the internet have video of it. These are rockets that were manufactured in Iran. Now, just yesterday, Israel shot down, and this is something that, because of the rocket fire, it's not making mainstream news. But as you remember, they also like to send over balloons and kites that have explosives in them. Yes. Well, now they've got something new. Now they've got kamikaze drones, and that's what they call them. Forgive me to the Japanese. They've got drones that are filled with explosives, and they crash them into populated centers. Well, Israel shot down one of those drones, and guess what? It's Iranian. All the markings, the name on it, the brand, it was manufactured in Iran. They are taking, if Hamas had taken the billions with a B, billions of dollars that the world has thrown at them to build hospitals and schools and infrastructure for their people, instead of utilizing it to buy weapons, imagine where Gaza would be today. But they're using it millions and millions of dollars on terror tunnels, on manufacturing rockets, on smuggling rockets in from Iran. And now we know they're getting these attack drones also from Iran. So this is, Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism. Without a doubt, this is known throughout the world. They've got their fingers and their people in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, in Gaza. They're throughout the whole world. This is what Iran does. And if you look at all those places I just mentioned, that's another rocket, and we got a half hour till the ceasefire. There's a second one. So, and they're hitting near Gaza. They're actually shooting close to Gaza.
Wow.
So, Hamas and the world, the oldest organization in the United Nations for humanitarian relief is the Palestinians. It goes all the way back to the 1948 agreement when Israel became a country. They're still giving them money through the United Nations. And they don't utilize that money for their own welfare. They don't utilize it for their own people. They use that money to try and attack Israel. They've been doing it since day one. It's not going to stop with this ceasefire. And mind you, it's a ceasefire. It's not a truce. It's not a peace. Israel and Syria are still at war. There's never been a peace treaty. Unlike with Egypt and with Jordan, where Israel now has a peace, they don't have that with Syria. They never had it with Hamas. And let's not forget, Hamas, in their charter, says we will push the Jews into the sea.
Wow.
Forgive my phone.
But that's important to hear. Don't forget, it's actually important that people hear that's happening as we're talking. I know I didn't bring this up, but I don't know if you heard, Al-Sisi has supposedly committed $5 million to the rebuilding of Gaza. Now, I'm personally surprised. It's that kind of surprised me, considering he has been against the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood is Hamas. Hamas is a chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood. But that news came out this week, and I guess that was a surprise to me. Maybe Clara Lopez would probably tell us it's not a surprise, but
it's not a surprise, and it's only $5 million, and he's being forced and shoved by. He's being forced and shoved by. I'm looking at my phone to see what area it is. And I still have friends and family over there. So $5 million, when you consider the amount of damage that's been done, is nothing. I mean, it's really nothing. $5 million is not going to bring them a lot of relief. But nonetheless, and I'm going to move my phone a little because this is going to continue for the next half hour, right up till 7 o'clock, and possibly after that. But what people forget, Egypt shares a border with Gaza just like Israel does. Yet Israel's the one that's always held to account. You know, Sky News broadcast the other day that Israel stopped sending humanitarian aid into Gaza. Well, yeah, but they neglected to explain that as Israel was sending in literally tons of medical aid, food, and water, the convoy was attacked by Hamas. That little tidbit they left out. They just said, while Gaza is suffering, they decided not to send them more aid. Well, since when is it Israel's responsibility to take care of Gaza anyway? They disengaged in 2005. They share a border with them, yes, but so does Egypt. Who ran Gaza before Israel did? Who does it belong to? Egypt. It's their cousins. It's their brothers. But yet they want no part of them. And this is what I explained the other night on the radio show I was on, Paul, and I know you know this, but I got to get it out there for your listeners. In 1979, when Anwar Sadat, the then president of Egypt, decided to make peace with Israel, and he was sitting with Menachem Begin, then prime minister of Israel, with the president of the United States in Camp David. In the United States, they're drawing up the peace treaty. Menachem Begin said, okay, so we're going to give you back the Sinai, and we're going to give you back Gaza. And Anwar Sadat said, whoa. No. You're keeping Gaza. We don't want that mess. Now, I'm paraphrasing, of course. I don't know that he called it a mess, but he said, we do not want Gaza. We want the Sinai. You give us back the Sinai, we have peace. We don't want Gaza, and that's a deal breaker. And he did say that was a deal breaker. If you want to have peace with us, you keep Gaza. That was his people. Why don't they want Gaza? For the same reason Jordan doesn't want the West Bank. They created those refugee camps, not Israel. This is where the world needs to wake up and do some due diligence of reading history, reading facts. Israel did not create this prison known as Gaza. Gaza has been under self-rule since 2005. Why is Israel still being blamed? Today in the Israeli news, they said Israel's not going to reconnect the electricity to Gaza. Why does Israel supply them with electricity? Why doesn't Egypt? You know, and I've talked to people who were born and raised in Gaza, who all told me, everyone I've spoken with, when they're out of earshot of everybody else, as if I didn't know this anyway. Until 1967, when Israel came in and took over Gaza, we never had running water. We never had medical care. We never had schools. It was the best thing to happen to us was Israel came in and took over. Now they miss that. And where does Gaza send their people when they're really, really hurt or sick? To Israel. For medical treatment. They don't send them to Egypt. Tel Aviv is the same distance as Cairo, one way or the other. Why don't they send them into Egypt? No, they send them to Israel. This has been going on since 2005. Israel fully disengaged. And what did it get answered with? Rockets. And just so you know, since 2005, over 22,750 rockets have fallen in Israel, not in Gaza, not the ones that fall short. 22,750 rockets have been fired into Israel from Gaza since Israel disengaged. How has that got anything to do with wanting land? They don't want the land. They want to get rid of the Jews. That's it. Plain and simple. This was never about land.
It's never been about land. It's never been about land. Anybody who says so is what I would call ignorant of history.
Yes.
And
you're being kind. I don't call it
being culturally stupid is what it comes down to. If you don't, I mean, as a social studies teacher, I would start out my class by explaining, they call this land the land of the Palestine, which means land of the Philistines, and this war has not ended. Okay, and it won't end. First of all, the Romans came up with that to insult the Jews. Yes. It has nothing to do with Muslims living there. They came in many hundreds of years later. Again, this is insanity, people. It's crazy. I want to say thank you for all that you're doing, and it's so important that these facts get out. I'm just going to ask your thoughts. This ceasefire is supposed to happen within the hour. Do you believe this will last more than 24 hours?
It's such a complex answer. Yes and no, and I'll explain what I mean. People need to realize that Hamas is not the only group putting rockets into Israel. You also have the Islamic Jihad. So will Hamas abide by it in the first 24 hours? Yeah, probably. Will every member of Hamas? Not necessarily, but more so will the Islamic Jihad. Will the other factions that are on the ground in Gaza that have access to these rockets abide by it? Probably not. I don't think that we'll see this last more than a few days at the most. But what worries me is the next round, because it's going to happen again, until Israel, unfortunately, goes in on the ground and takes out Hamas 100%. It's going to keep on happening. And the problem is, as you know, Paul, you can't kill an ideology. Israel can take out every Hamas member in Gaza, and within a week, you're going to have new people joining what used to be Hamas. They might call it something else. They might call it Hamas 2.0. You're never going to be able to kill that ideology. And unfortunately, that ideology is Islam. And it's going to keep on happening. The players may change, but the ideology stays the same. And I know you know this as a teacher and as one who has studied this, and now you teach it. People need to really familiarize themselves, it's right here, with this. Their so-called book. This is the problem. It's a cult. It's not a religion. It's a political totalitarianism with a religion wrapped up inside it.
That's exactly a great way to put it.
And it's not a real religion. And don't you dare ever, all your listeners, don't ever let any person tell you that they pray to the same God you do. Because I'll tell you right now, if you're Christian and you believe in Jesus Christ being the Son of God, it says right in that book, Allah never had any children. So you tell me how it's your God, because it's not. And Allah Akbar doesn't mean God is great. It means our God is greater.
Greater.
People need to educate themselves. This is what I did for years on that network, what you're doing now. And all I ask, I used to say back when the book burning was big, when they were burning Qurans, don't burn it, read it. Read it and educate yourself. I'm not proud to admit I've read that book cover to cover 3 times. I haven't done that with the Bible. Not a great thing to admit, but I know my enemy. People need to educate themselves. If nothing else, it's out there. The internet is free.
That's exactly it. We need to know the enemy, and until we do, we cannot win. And when you're fighting an ideology, you have to fight with another better ideology. That's the only way to win. This is part of how we won World War II against the Nazis.
Exactly.
That's what it comes down to. Unfortunately, we are in a battle, and it is a spiritual battle, and you will hear of some miracles that happen in this battle against the evil of Islam that fights against Israel. You'll see them. You'll hear about them. They are real, actual events where God intervenes, and they can't be denied. They're on video, they're on audio, they're there and preserved for people to see. I've actually heard of events where the Iron Dome may have missed something, and for some strange reason, the rocket goes out to sea. I've seen some of these things, and I just sit there like, wow. I mean, this is God's intervention, and I'm really happy that that's happening. But again, we are in a battle against an ideology, which is Islam, and that is something we all need to understand. I want to say thank you, Gadi.
Thank you.
Your work is important. I hope to have you back soon, because not for this reason, but for something else. Let's look at something else. Find something we can also. I hate having to talk about attacks against one of our most beloved allies in the world. But
as our members of Congress are saying they're not an ally, don't even get me started. I have one request from you and all your listeners.
Okay.
And I know you guys pray, and I know you pray for Israel, and I know you pray for the Jews, and I appreciate that. But I want you to go one better for me.
Okay.
Everybody listening to me, if you see any type or hear any comments that are anti-Semitic in nature, please stand up for your Jewish brothers and sisters, because, and it makes me, and it's scary that I come to this point, it makes me think of the poem from the Polish priest during World War II about how when they finally came for me, there was no one left to speak up for me. And that's we're going to see another Holocaust. That is where we are heading. We've seen those that have denied the Holocaust happened. We've seen those that now twist it and say, well, it wasn't that bad. A lot of these videos are fake. It's Jewish propaganda. We have Iran, who is sponsoring Hamas, every day saying they're going to create a second Holocaust. They're going to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And now we have American politicians comparing the country of Israel to Nazi Germany. American politicians. I never thought I would see that. And that scares the living hell out of me, because there's only one step forward from there. And the next step is when they start doing things like we see a rise in anti-Semitism, and they turn the other way. I didn't see anything. I'm not Jewish, so it doesn't bother me. Stand up for your Jewish brothers and sisters, because let me promise you this. Those of us that are Jewish will stand up for our Christian brothers and sisters.
Yeah. Thank you, Gadi. We'll have to have you back soon. God bless.
God bless. Thank you.